I'd like to welcome CEO Phillip Lynch and Chief Scientific Officer. I can see Daniel online, Daniel Tillett from Race Oncology. Race Oncology is a precision oncology company with a phase 2 asset in Zantrene. Zantrene was approved back in the 90s, but has embarked on a whole new life, as we're just about to find out. It's a very multifaceted asset. And I'll hand it over to Phil to begin that presentation. Thank you, Phil.
Thanks, Chris. Can I just confirm that you're seeing full screen?
I can see the full screen.
And hearing me clearly?
Very clearly.
Okay, thanks. And welcome to those that are joining us. Whether it's for the first time or it's a refresh, we hope to share something that's new for you today. I'm joined by Daniel Tillett, so I'll just give you an overview of our business, somewhat historical, but equally touch on strategy. We did our AGM update last week, so I'm using a deck from that. It's being released to market, but Daniel will follow through on particularly programs and plans that we're running this year that I think will be informative. Disclaimers, of course, which I'm sure you've read and are aware of. I'll start by talking about just an overview of us, and I appreciate some of you know us well, but perhaps some of you less so. We're a clinical stage company. We're focused on the M6A RNA pathway. We'll talk more about that, particularly through FTO, because FTO is a protein within that pathway. Our drug was identified by the City of Hope in Los Angeles, independently of us, as the most potent inhibitor of that particular protein. And that protein is being discovered to be important to cancer across a number of different cancer types. In fact, most every cancer type. There's strong preclinical data that says that inhibiting that protein will create better outcomes. And we hope to progress that to the clinic and prove that going forward. More recently, we've focused and discussed the ability of our drug to operate in what we call cardioprotection. So many of you would know that chemotherapy, whilst backbone treatment for many cancer types, particularly early stage, it's very effective. It can be toxic, but one of the negative outcomes is often cardiac damage. And what we've discovered is that preclinically, if we combine Zantrene, our drug, with frequently used chemotherapeutics in combination or adjunctively, that we create or we mitigate that cardiac damage. So you get a better cancer outcome and you get a less or a cardio positive outcome, frankly. So that's particularly exciting, and we're qualifying that right now. We've got a new formula that we've announced that we're currently developing that will be manufactured in 23. That gives us utility, value in respect of how we use our drug, but particularly on IP, it'll extend our IP life significantly. So a number of inflection points that we'll touch on today. In sum, we're an oncology business, and we've got opportunities traditionally in the acute myeloid leukemia space that we're currently trialing against. We believe we've got significant opportunities more broadly in solid tumor or FTO-driven cancers. Again, I'll say more about that. I touched on cardioprotection. It's a significant market because anthracyclines or chemotherapeutics are still broadly and widely used. The ability to combine our drug with them in a way that creates positive outcomes, better cancer outcomes, we think is significant, and we think is a change management that could be quite easy to achieve in the future. We've got some work in other M6A RNA drugs that we've touched on as well. And if we've got time, we'll talk about that today. I won't read the 2-year history, but it's significant, as has been the expansion in our market cap, but that's predicated on just a couple of highlights I'll touch on. The initial June 2020 acute myeloid leukemia phase 2 trial in Israel. We generated a 40% response, reminding people that our drug remains relevant today. It's had a history of performance, and that performance remains true today. I mentioned June 2020, the FTO discovery by Professor Chen. We'll come back to that. Through the last 2 years, we've had a number of results in melanoma and in kidney cell. So those are both potential cancers that we could trial in to demonstrate our FTO credentials in inhibiting cancer in solid tumor types. We've also had good cardioprotective results. both test tube and animal. We've released data on that and updated a couple of times on that. So that's now progressing, and we're right now in primary research in the US with physicians to identify the actual size of that market based on a prescribed TPP, or target product profile. We raised capital in December 2021, raising 29.7. We actually took 40, gave back circa 11. But that's allowed us to effectively match capital with strategy and with programs, and we're going down that road. We just got pre-IND guidance from the FDA, so we're pretty comfortable with understanding optionality on what we might choose to do in the US. We haven't announced US plans, but they remain available to us. Touching on a couple of corporate snapshot highlights. I mentioned capital, of course, at $29.4 million. That's in September. On this call, you've got Daniel, our Chief Scientific Officer and Exec Director, owning almost 10%. John Cullity, our Chair, who's US-based and has a significant pharma background and deal background, and Merchant Opportunities Perth at 5%. We've got a large retail register. That retail register was very supportive in the most recent capital raise, which was a pure SPP back in December of last year. So just talking about the market and us, so we would say to you all, depending on how well you know us, but we're a new team or newish team. We've got new opportunities that are being somewhat gifted to us that we're progressing, and with that, it's being appropriate, and we have designed new strategy to support that. And that's principally around pursuing the FTO-related opportunity in solid tumor oncology, but also in leukemias, I should say. Certainly qualifying, as we have preclinically, the chemotherapeutic application and moving that into the clinic, which we'll talk about for next year, and acknowledging that really our drug is not an AML only drug. It has broad application that we're qualifying and I think demonstrating with our plans. You'll hear us talk, or have talked, about M6A, the RNA pathway. That's because it's involved in the dysregulation of so many diseases, and I think we know that regulated systems are important to good health, and when they're dysregulated, they're quite the opposite. So what we know is that this space is developing very quickly, and the growth in publications to the graph on the right is illustrative. Our strategy, simply said, is today our current drug Zantrene, as is the current formula, we're running in 2 trials. In fact, we're in Israel. We're now phase 2, having got through phase 1 recently. That's a combination drug trial in Israel, so it's now in phase 2. That's against AML, or acute myeloid leukemia. We also have in Australia, we've started and we're recruiting right now for an AML trial with 2 stratums, so a high dose of our drug and a low dose of our drug. Our low dose stratum 2 is with another partner, decitabine, and that will help us to demonstrate proof of principle that inhibiting FTO has application to improving outcomes. The pillar 2 is what we call Zantrene OPTIMISED. It leverages our new formula. That's going to help us prosecute the solid tumor opportunity. We are working on potentially an oral formula, but all of that said, the formula we've announced already gives us great new IP that will help with building value, partnering, and of course, the application of our drug to solid tumor oncology. I touched earlier on beyond Zantrene, where we're looking with modest investment and through partnerships, screening of different compounds that may help us pursue additional opportunities in the M6A pathway. This graph, and I appreciate I'm moving quickly, but I'll do that. I hope that helps. That's Zantrene as is, the orange group. So that's the 2 trials we have underway right now. Zantrene OPTIMISED is our plans for the new formula and the optionality that new formula gives us. And what this will tell you is that we may progress a program in melanoma and or clear cell renal cell carcinoma. We're needing to determine the most optimal plan to do that. We're manufacturing our new formula through 23. We've got some work going on companion diagnostics, and I think I touched on beyond Zantrene sufficiently. I'll take you to 2023, and I'll pass over to Daniel and invite Daniel to talk you through our current program and trials. Daniel.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, so I guess the first sort of important trial we have going on at the moment is a trial in a form of acute myeloid leukemia called extramedullary AML. So this is a form of leukemia where the leukemia escapes the bone marrow, takes up residence in some tissue in the body. And when it does that, it forms basically a solid tumor and behaves very similar to a solid tumor, like a breast cancer a tumor, or a kidney cancer tumor, or any of those things. And you can see there on the right-hand side, a patient from our trial in Israel in 2020. That patient their bone marrow had been cleared of the acute myeloid leukemia, but it still remained in the breast tissue. And you can see that as dark patches around the breast. After one cycle of Zantrene on its own, was able to clear that out of the patient. So really quite remarkable result. And we saw the same thing in other patients in that trial. And that really gave us the impetus to run a trial looking at specifically in this extramedullary form of AML. It's about a quarter of all AML patients have this. They typically have a poor prognosis, so worse than AML, which is not good to begin with. And so in that trial, we're running two forms, as Phil mentioned, stratum 1 and 2. One uses a high dose Zantrene, similar to the trial that was run in Israel. And then stratum 2 is using a low dose of Zantrene plus an oral decitabine in collaboration with Aztecs, Osaka, a Japanese company. So they're funding that oral decitabine with us in a collaborative study. And the advantage, what we're taking advantage here is decitabine causes upregulation of FTO, which means that you makes the cells very sensitive to a FTO targeted drug like Zantrene. It's designed for patients that can't handle high intensity chemo, which is about 2/3 of all AML patients. We're running this trial. Intention is 10 sites. We have one site up and running here in Australia. We're expanding in 2023 into other sites. We're also expanding to Europe, 6 sites there in Europe. So the main reason for that expansion is AML is a rare disease. We're looking at a subset of a rare disease, so you need to use many more sites. So, but this will give us the first sort of clinical evidence that FTO, there's a lot of scientific evidence to suggest that FTO is a really exciting target, but there's been no clinical data to date. And this will give us the first clinical data of any company in the world. This is a viable target to go after, an attractive target. So we think it's very important. Next slide, Phil.
Yeah, hang on, Daniel. My slide has stuck. Let me just, if you would like to keep talking, I will try to get it going.
Yeah, so, well, I think the next slide is all about cardioprotection. And so cardioprotection is a discovery that has been sort of known for a long time with Zantrene. It was originally developed as a drug that had less cardiotoxicity compared to the other chemotherapeutic drugs. And that's been well tested in humans all the way through to phase 3. It's very well known to be this. But what wasn't known was whether it was actually just an inherent property of the drug that it wasn't cardiotoxic like all the others, or whether it was hitting some secondary pathway that was rescuing from that damage. So it was just as toxic as all the other drugs in the class, but it was able to overcome that through hitting a rescue pathway. And turned out when we combine Zantrene with known cardiotoxic agents that are well used in the clinic, things like doxorubicin and epirubicin, that it turned out to actually protect the damage from that. So really becomes a really exciting opportunity because these drugs are very widely used in the clinic across a wide range of different cancers, not only breast cancer, and ovarian cancer is another very commonly one, sarcomas, quite a wide range. We have this ability to overcome the main limiting toxicity that prevents the use of those drugs, and the main side effect that comes from that that's really difficult for doctors to address. So once you damage the heart, the heart has no ability to recover, and so it becomes permanent damage to the patient, and they can often end up being cured of their cancer, and end up dying of heart failure, which is, not such a great outcome from the patient's perspective. So we think this is a very large market. So far, all the clinical data, all the preclinical data, all the cellular data have all lined up, and we are just about to undertake a clinical trial of this. I don't know whether it's on the next slide, Phil. May not be.
Again, I need to just...
It's freezing, yeah. So as a consequence
of
all of this, we announced that we were submitting an ethics application to start this trial early in the new year, and that went in, which is yesterday, which is great, and we expect to be able to get underway very quickly. So putting all these pieces together, what have we got? We've got a very exciting pathway tackling the M6A in FTO. We have this cardioprotection, which is also able to look at FTO as well whilst we run that trial. We have the ability to move into other solid tumours. One of the great things about FTO as a target is it's very widely found across basically all cancer types that anyone's looked at. So we have the ability to, as an opportunity, we have the ability to have a drug that can be utilised not just in a narrow range of cancers or subtypes of cancers, but very, very widely. As Phil mentioned, we have new IP around improved formulation that allows the drug to be delivered through a peripheral vein rather than a central line, and that allows it to be used in an outpatient setting in a doctor's office, in the patient's home, just much more convenient for all the patient, much easier to deliver, and resets the patent clock for us, which is obviously very attractive. We have also, as Phil mentioned, we have a discovery program going on in this space. We've developed a lot of skill and knowledge around this space internally, and we think we have some pretty good ideas about how we can actually identify new molecules that are better suited to some of the other areas that M6A plays a role. So as when Phil put up the slide earlier, it's not just cancer that this pathway is important, also important metabolic diseases, things like diabetes, obesity, heart disease, viral, and different drugs are more suited for those particular applications. And the final thing we've got going on is development of companion diagnostics, so we can identify exactly where Zantrene is most appropriate to be used. So whilst Zantrene can be utilised in all cancer types, it's only in a subset where FTO is overexpressed, being overproduced by the cancer, that you would want to use that. So you need to have some sort of diagnostic that can identify the patients that would best respond to the drug. And that's very important these days for precision oncology. We happen to be the leading company in the world. We have the first M6A RNA drug in the clinic. We've just been joined by another company in the UK. They happen to have a drug that's on the other side of the pathway, so very compatible with what we've got. But it's a very exciting opportunity there. And at this stage, I'll pass it back to Phil, since Phil seems to have trouble pushing the slides forward for me. Maybe it'll work better for him.
Well, we're on the last slide, in fact, before we pass to questions. But I think importantly and positively for those that follow us, and frankly for us advancing strategy, we've got a number of inflection points. So you'll continue to hear news and updates from us, I think, as we've done well in this last couple of years. But we've got the cardioprotective trial we've spoken about. We've gone to ethics on that yesterday, I think it was. So we'll have updates on that trial through next year. We're awaiting to dose the first patient in our phase 1/2, the extramedullary AML trial, European sites for that same trial. Decisions around the solid tumor trial selection and how we initiate that. Phase 2 data that's flowing from Israel, the peripheral formula, the new molecule program, companion diagnostics. So, broadly, good news and relative frequency on that news. And finally, because it's always important to shareholders, I know, who ask, well, when are we going to market our data and try to build further partnerships that may create additional value? That program we set at the AGM last week is front and center and will be something that we lean into. We won't be able to share too much about what it constitutes, but it'll be underway by year end for next year. With that, I'll pause and I'll note, Chris, do you want to lead us through on questions? I know there's a couple in the chat already, so I'll let you help us.
Yes, I think we've got a couple more. I think you've answered some of those, which are around partnering and licensing. So I think you've answered that. I did have a question of my own, which was, given so many multiple indications that you could possibly apply Zantrene to, how do you as a company allocate resources, or how do you prioritize what comes first?
Yeah, let me start on that. Daniel's welcome to add, but I think, Chris, our evolution has been from being, if you like, a acute myeloid leukemia focused company, where our drug was traditionally a chemotherapeutic. When we got the City of Hope findings, and they've now been independently verified additionally, that opened up the FTO opportunity. So we've done a lot of preclinical homework to validate what we believe to be a significant opportunity. We invited shareholders to support us moving that work into the clinic, which they funded. So given that we've been funded to do that, that's exactly what we'll do in 2023. Importantly, I will also add that's the same story for cardioprotection. Our drug had a legacy known application where it was less cardiotoxic, but the discovery preclinically that when we use it in combination means that we're going to get a better outcome. Potentially, we can change chemotherapy, whereby our drug may be used broadly in combination in a great many cancers. So that was, again, something that was funded by shareholders. So we haven't had to prioritize against that. I think, Chris, your question I take going forward, because we continue to learn more. And I know there's a question today about the City of Hope findings that were published today that shareholders seem to have picked up on. So I might invite Daniel to talk on that, because that becomes another opportunity. But frankly, Chris, one that maybe we're not funded to evaluate at this point. Daniel.
Yeah, so I think we have to be sort of opportunistic as opportunities come along. This is actually one of the difficulties. It's very easy to get distracted as each new piece of exciting data gets published. There's a lot of papers being published every year, thousands of papers in this space, and you can easily just chase after the most exciting new one. But we've taken a pause on making the decision on the solid tumor front whilst we wait for the new formulation to be delivered, which is due to arrive in the middle of next year. Because we could start a trial now in solid tumor, but we'd have to start it again once the new formula was arrived. So we're going through systematically through every cancer that preclinically in existence. We're going through all the drug combinations. There's a massive matrix and working out exactly which is the best combination, which is the best cancer to go after, and then take that into the clinic once we have really solid and robust preclinical data. So we're really quite lucky to have so many opportunities. The other thing, of course, obviously partnering becomes really important in this. When we talk to partners who have drugs and we find that our drug works really well with their drug, it's a great opportunity to go off and talk to that partner and say, would you like to fund or, a trial looking at this as a combination? And it's a very successful strategy that many small biotechs like us have used in the past. So we'll take advantage of where things go. So it may well be that we go after an opportunity that maybe is not the most super exciting, but if someone else is willing to pay for the trial to get it run, then it makes it worthwhile doing. So it doesn't cost the shareholders free money, effectively.
That sounds sensible. In the interest of time, we might leave it there, but I'd like to thank Dr. Daniel Tillett and Phillip Lynch from Race Oncology. I think this is one space we're all watching.
Yeah, it's an exciting opportunity. So one that comes along rarely, I think.
I think so. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.